Welcome to Business Remix with Tim and Guy. I'm Tim Seymour. This is my good friend Guy Adami. Holidays are bearing down on top of us.
Can you believe it?
It's getting
like
close.
that.
Getting close. I hope you're ready. And this week in history, because we love to do this kind of stuff, before our country was even a country, back in 1773, we had this thing called the Boston Tea Party. Going to drop some tea in the bottom of the sea.
Think about that.
Yeah.
1773, to your point, before we were in a country, obviously that starts 1776. By the way, we're coming up on like a 250-year anniversary.
Remember the bicentennial when we were growing up? It was like all it was. I mean, we were younger guys. We were young guys.
We were.
And I'd like to say we were barely young guys, but I remember.
The Boston Tea Party, a lot of characters came out of that.
Yeah.
Sam Adams, for example. Now, you're a bar owner.
Yeah.
Do people order Sam Adams where you
We don't have Sam Adams.
No.
And I mean, you know, I'm not going to do the old Guy Adami. The next Sam Adams I have will be my first Sam Adams, but it might be my second. I mean, we're at a place. I like a lager. I like a light lager.
A lager.
And I don't like any of this IPA stuff. So what Sam has done successfully, by the way, and Boston beer is an interesting stock to look at because it's been destroyed. And if you think about some of the dynamics going on in the beer industry, but anyway, let's talk about this kind of sense of, you know, our country is in an interesting time, right? There is a sense of that there's been a change. There is a sense that I think there's a fresh start. There are things that are going on, and how do you want to address it?
Well, let's talk about like what was going on back then. And I confuse these cats. I don't even know if they were involved, but there are two people that I always come back to. Patrick Henry and Nathan Hale. Now, one of them said, "Give me liberty or give me death." And the other one said, "I regret that I have but one life to give to my country."
But hold on.
But it's those dudes.
Yeah, and then there's another famous Hale, Alan Hale,
100%.
who used to say, "Gilligan, my boy."
Which, by the way,
that was Thurston. Little buddy.
Alan Hale was the skipper.
He was the skipper.
Now, what's great about Gilligan's Island, by the way, and we will talk about some things that people are sort of revolting about and around, but the first year of that show, the song, you know the famous song.
The weather started getting rough.
Now, they didn't mention Marianne and the professor. It was just, and the rest. Gilligan said, you know what, this ain't flying
Bob
anymore.
Denver. Not John Denver, but Bob Denver.
And he said, we got to do something. So in season 2 and 3 and then subsequent, it was the professor and Marianne, little known fact.
Well, by the way, for folks, again, who are tuning in on radio and certainly streaming along, show us some love on social and come to our site. And because if you can tell me what Alan Hale's name was on the show. So again, he was the skipper, but he had a name, and they mentioned it once or twice. But
we'll do some giveaways on that.
Think about the SS Minnow. Think about it was shipwrecked. And when you think about shipwrecks, sometimes you think about pirates, and you think about gold. And you think about the dynamic around gold. Yes, that's where I'm going with this. Because gold in 2024, again, had another incredible year. And I'm long of gold. I think gold is the place to be. But let's be clear. Especially since elections, the punctuation on the Bitcoin market. Bitcoin is possibly the currency, not just for 2025, but beyond. What's your call on that?
Well, people were upset in 1773. No taxation without representation.
Yes.
There are a lot of angry people.
By the way, were you wearing that 3-point hat
100%.
back in the day? I bet you liked that gear.
100%.
Yeah.
Without question. I feel like sometimes I am like kindred spirits.
Caught in a little bit of a time warp.
But I think something happened about 10 or so years ago, actually longer than that, probably 15 or so years ago. I think a couple people were upset about central banks, to your point, and they're running amok. Bitcoin was created out of people being upset. In the same way people in the Boston Tea Party were upset, that's what created Bitcoin. And I will tell you, the Bitcoin revolution, which started in 08, 09, sort of caught some wind in sort of the middle teens, off to the races now. In 2025, you're going to hear a lot more mainstream crypto, specifically Bitcoin.
So, and I think it's important to call this education on the background of why crypto and even gold have been very important over the last few years. I mean, you can make an argument that a chart of gold is the best 20-year chart you're going to see out of any security out there. But there is an argument that was once the gold standard, which effectively was what all currencies were backed by. Every dollar you printed, you had to have gold to back it. Well, when you're the United States, and maybe not in 1773, but certainly in 2024 and 25, you can print however much you want. And the printing presses, folks, have been rolling. And the reality is that gives people rise and cause and conviction around owning assets that are limited, and you can't just back them.
I'm going to take you down a path.
I can tell.
So just get ready.
Yeah, all right.
In hockey, who do you think the gold standard franchise is in all of hockey?
Well, it's the New York Rangers, of
Well,
course.
no, it's not. I mean, you're
original
embarrassing
six.
yourself. I mean, the gold standard, Montreal Canadiens.
The Habs.
The Habs.
Yes.
I mean, that's
There's
fair,
Canadiens.
right?
How's my French?
I mean,
whatever. All right.
The NFL is a little more difficult because obviously you
I think
have
it's the Cowboys. I hate to say
Super
it.
Bowl. You have that. You're going to give me the Cowboys as the gold
look,
standard?
in my lifetime, the Giants have won 4 Super Bowls and gone to a 5th. So, I mean, they're right there.
Fair
but
enough.
I think the Steelers are right there. I think the Packers are right there.
I think I like what you're doing.
Okay.
I mean, I'm going to throw a little Pittsburgh Steelers at you. I think they're the franchise that people want to emulate.
Okay.
Consistency.
Yeah. Oh, boy. How many head coaches in the last 40 years?
3 or
Yeah,
4.
Yeah.
Which is remarkable.
No, it's
I mean,
impressive.
the Jets have had
Jets
4 in the
last week.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Okay. The NBA,
Yeah.
the gold standard. You could pick one of 2 in this.
Celtics.
Celtics.
Has to be.
No doubt.
Has to be. I say that as a New Yorker. I'm not happy about it.
100%.
but yeah.
I mean, the Celtics are the gold standard in the NBA.
By the way, I almost did like a forget about it. I had it as a New Yorker. No, I don't speak like that, but I acknowledge the Celtics.
The other potential would be obviously the Lakers.
Hold on. I'm going to stop this conversation because I don't like where this is going because you're about to go to baseball and you're about to pat your team on the back.
I am going
Just
to
go
baseball.
right there then, please.
Who is the gold standard not only of baseball, but of all sports, Tim
I like
Seymour?
how you got this.
Thank you.
Because, again, a conversation about how important Bitcoin's going to be in 2025 just turned into patting the Yanks on their little fannies.
The Yankees are the gold standard not only of baseball, but of all of sport. They're the envy of everybody in sport.
Stop. Okay. And the point that we want to make is there was a time in our country where there was change, and that augured a lot of important things. And I would argue part of the change that's going to make Bitcoin one of the most important asset classes in 2025 is the change that's going to be in the Securities Exchange Commission. Gary Gensler, no bid for crypto or digital assets, and really at times went to great lengths just to almost be as obstinate as possible. The fact that Trump and his administration going into on the campaign trail went out, and maybe it was campaign promises, maybe it was legit. The reality is, with the importance of other players, including Mr. Doge himself, I mean, the reality is that digital assets are mainstream. And if you say, whether you're an institutional investor, the biggest hedge funds in the world, or even retail advisors, and there's a lot of money managers that listen to us and watch Fast Money and listen to what we have to say. I mean, they are following the world of digital assets. And the reality is that more regulation is good. And when I mean more regulation, let the SEC get involved. Let them say it's okay. Let them regulate. Look at what happened to the Bitcoin ETFs and the Ether ETFs. So I think Bitcoin in 2025, I think it could double. And I think that's a headline that, may be a little aggressive here after the move it's had. But based upon the supply dynamics and the fact that it's game on, I think it's interesting.
You've made some prescient calls on CNBC's Fast Money.
Once in a while.
No, you have.
They say the blind squirrel finds a nut.
Well,
now and
you
again.
found a number of nuts.
Okay, thank you.
But Coinbase is a name that you've talked about now for quite some time. And the move in Coinbase, so if the folks watching, listening, don't want to get into Bitcoin, there are other ways to do it. And Coinbase, the symbol there is coin, has been a great way. The question I have to you is the move over? Is the music over? That's the Doors, by the way.
Yeah.
Or is there still some more gas in the tank?
When the music's over, turn out the lights.
Okay, see,
it's
now
a decent Jim Morrison.
We've lost a number of our viewers.
It's a decent Jim Morrison. No, it's the music's not over. But like any moment in markets where you've had a little bit too much of a move and a momentum move, I think you're going to see a little bit of a thaw and maybe possibly a little retracement, as we say. But I think the dynamic here is very important. I think, again, it's a dynamic where I think 2025 for deregulation in broader industries is also part of the story here. So yes, I think the SEC is going to treat digital assets differently, and I think more regulation is actually good and more allowance of digital. But I think about all the other industries, whether it's media, whether it's tech, certainly, whether it's healthcare, where I think M&A is game on as well in 2025. And I think even in the banking sector, I think the regional banks, I think there'll be much consolidation. Your thoughts on that?
I think there's going to be a lot of M&A, specifically in healthcare. I think the banks, given this new administration, I think a lot of these small and regional banks are going to get gobbled up. I also think that 2025 is going to be a year where both Bitcoin and gold can have their day in the sun.
I love that. And speaking of folks that are getting coal in their stocking, what are you expecting this year? Have you been a good boy?
I would say that I'm always a good person,
Yeah.
Tim, but I don't expect anything. If I were to get a lump of coal, I'd be just as happy as if I were to get let's say, a Hope Diamond. Because I am of that. Remember at the end of The Grinch?
Oh, boy.
Remember the end of the movie when all their toys and stockings and trees were gone, yet they still went out in the square and sang? I am one of those people.
Well, you're singing a good song. When we come back on Business Remix, we're going to sing about a lot of songs in my vinyl collection. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Business Remix, one of my favorite segments.
It's all good.
It's great.
It's great.
It's
Sorry.
Tim's Vinyl Vault.
Tim's Vinyl Vault.
Yes, it is.
And what we do is you go home, you get a stack of records.
I've got a lot of vinyl, by the way. It was tempting to sell it for beer money in the late teens, but I didn't.
How many albums do you think you have in your vinyl vault?
Tim's Vinyl Vault.
I've probably got about 470.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty
Well,
good.
you brought about 12 of them
Yep.
with you here.
Yep.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you pick them up.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you a number. You pick out the number album that I give you. You're going to hand me the album.
Okay.
This is like magic.
Oh.
And I'm going to name some titles of songs, and you're going to give me your views on stocks and the markets based on those titles.
Look,
Are you ready for this?
This sounds fun, and it does sound a little bit like a magic show.
Well,
So
it is
just-
a magic
Just don't
show.
cut any of them in half. All right?
Magic.
All right.
Pick them up.
Stack of albums. Here they are. Wow. Mamas and Papas leading off. Look at that.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
By the way, great album.
Yeah.
All right.
And a kind of
Well,
a
I mean,
bizarre
these are
story
all-
there. I mean, with Mama Cass.
Pull
and-
out album number 5
number
for me.
5. Springsteen, CSNY, Linda Ronstadt.
Linda Ronstadt.
Look at her.
Can I tell you something?
Don't want to make the brown eyes blue right
So,
there.
well, that's
Yeah,
not Linda
oh,
Ronstadt,
all right,
okay?
well,
But
sorry.
I like what you did there.
All right.
Can I have the album,
You got
please?
the album.
I mean,
so what are we going to do here?
So I have this Linda Ronstadt album.
Yeah.
By the way, I want to show this to the audience. Like many men of my age,
Yes.
I had a huge Linda Ronstadt crush.
Okay.
So this is the 1970s. I'm going to be 61
Okay,
years
no,
old.
look, I mean,
as a matter of fact, whilst we're doing this,
Yeah.
my birthday is coming up. I hope you got me something good.
Let's just say there's not going to be coal in your stuff.
Fair enough.
All right.
All right, so I'm going to rattle off some songs.
Okay.
And you're going to help me to sort of think about the market.
Yeah, that's what we do. I mean, these songs really are painting a picture of the canvas that the market has for us, or maybe what the market's going to give us. Fire away. All right.
You're No Good. By the way, a great song.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Linda saying, you know what? You're no good, man.
Yeah,
I can do better than you.
Yeah. I think when I think about You're No Good for the market that we've had, I think it's a combination of there are certain sectors that have been unloved. I think healthcare of late has been unloved. I think about China. I mean, the view in our country right now, especially in the markets for investors, is you're no good, China. Now, that's often, for investors, that's an opportunity. When everyone gets to one side of the boat and when sentiment gets so poor, and in my lifetime, and as you know, at one point I was running an emerging markets hedge
you
fund.
were.
I actually spent some time in that part of the world, and I've invested in that asset class. I've never seen China this unloved or no good as it has been
It's
here.
pretty amazing if you think about some of these stocks. Alibaba,
Yeah.
I think, is a name that everybody knows or should know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a stock that's been no good now for the last 4 years. It's had some moves along the way to the upside. You've had some 30 to 50% bounces, but this is a stock that's been no good now for 4 years.
Amen.
Hopefully it gets a little bit better, but it still feels like it's going to be no good. That'll be the day.
That'll be the day. So if you completed the lyric, it'll be that'll be the day when I die.
Yeah.
Meaning when it's never going to happen, right? You know what's never going to happen? The world is going to never stop buying U.S. Treasuries. So people talk about yields are going to the moon, and I agree, and I worry about deficit spending, and that's been part of the argument. By the way, both sides of the aisle equally guilty, in my view, to this moment in time for the last 15 to 20 years. It's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. It's fiscal runaway and lack of discipline. So having said that, U.S. Treasuries are still the gold standard, and we've talked about Bitcoin and gold, but that'll be the day I die when people stop buying treasuries for credit risk.
You think about this, you mentioned it, that'll be the day when I die. There have been a lot of people over the last 5, 6, 7 years talking about the U.S. dollar, which is the reserve currency for the world, maybe losing that status. But as you just said, Tim, that'll be the day when it's just not happening.
Not in my lifetime, buddy.
No, not in mine either.
Pal.
Here's one. What did you just do?
I
Did
buddy
you pal
palled
me?
you. Buddy palled you.
When will I be loved? Now, I'm just telling you, I know where you're going to go with this. When will I be loved? When will this company be loved?
Look, there's a couple companies that I've been well flagged for getting wrong on CNBC TV. One of them is Pfizer. And this was one of the darling companies, and I would make an argument at a difficult time in our country, Pfizer's science stepped up, and the stock probably traded up 60%. It's not only given that back, but it's lower than it was pre-COVID. It's treated as if this company has no other business than vaccines and Paxlovid and that dynamic. When will I be loved? I'm not so sure, because I think there's a lot of pressure on healthcare companies. But again, I would point out that the valuation, while not crazy cheap, because it's not as if their earnings have been off the charts, I think this is a company that will be loved in 2025.
What's interesting about that, when will I be loved? It leads me to a product that they make, which actually,
Interesting.
You see what I'm doing
The
there?
little blue pill. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
but
look,
maybe we should move on.
I don't think we
from
should
there.
joke about this.
No,
This is a serious issue
it's
for
a
people,
serious
Dami.
issue.
All right. Well,
But
all
it's
right.
just an interesting
Let's
take
be sensitive
on.
to that, please.
I'm going to throw something at you real quick.
All right.
When will Boeing be loved? I mean, you
Oh,
think about
that's-
this is one of the great American companies, fell on hard times about 4 years ago, seemingly has not recovered. We need, I think, a strong Boeing, but we've had anything but. And one has to ask, is Boeing, will it be ever loved again?
It will be. It's taking time, and I think Boeing really got arrogant and got away from what they did, which, by the way, was manufacturing and a production process that was highly scrutinized and highly detailed. They started outsourcing. It's a defense company whose defense business has been under a little pressure too. I'm not going to put a timeline on when Boeing will be loved. I think this is a longer cycle, much in the way I think of making an airplane is a long cycle kind of a manufacturing process. But I like Boeing, and I like what you did there.
Here's a lyric for you. Whenever I'm with him, something inside. That's heat wave.
That's heat wave. Yeah.
Talk to me. What has enjoyed a heat wave recently?
It's interesting because I thought you were still talking about that product that Pfizer produces.
Well,
but,
now I'm in your head now. You're projecting.
Something that's had a heat wave of late. I mean, first of all, the move in Tesla after not being loved for a long time, and it's a bit ironic because I think some of the news flow around the fundamentals of the company were still a couple quarters away. But there's no question it's been a heat wave there. I think if you think about some of the other places, banks overall have been on a tear. Delta Airlines has been on a tear, and again, I go back to companies that I think have been quietly doing the right thing over the last 3 or 4 years, but it takes a while sometimes for markets to realize that. Stay there as an investor. If you know the fundamentals of a company, you can sleep on names like this.
Before I give you the last song, I'm going to call a little bit of an audible here. One would not think that a band like the Rolling Stones and a Linda Ronstadt would sing the same song, but in the form of Tumbling Dice, they did exactly that. My question to you is, whose version is better?
Nice lead in.
Whose version is better? The Rolling Stones Tumbling Dice or Linda Ronstadt's?
Honestly, I'm not sure that I could really tell you a lot about Linda's version.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
I mean,
Obviously,
Linda Ronstadt's version is true. I'll take Linda. You take the Rolling Stones.
Yeah, and by the way, I like the Stones, but I think they're overrated.
Fair
and
enough.
There's going to be a lot of people that are going to be angry with that. But I mean, that's Coke and Pepsi. By the way, what is little known about people with Linda Ronstadt's band from the early days is there's a super group where two of the founding members were backup musicians to Linda Ronstadt. Again, folks on social, folks listening right now, streaming, let us know if you know who we're talking about. The backup band for Linda Ronstadt in her early years was a super group, the two most important pieces. Let's keep moving.
I like what you did there. Final song. Tracks of My Tears.
Tracks of My Tears.
Think about that. I mean, think about in our world.
Really,
There's a lot of tears at times in terms of what we do.
Yeah. It's interesting how you put it like that. And I think the tracks of my tears for a lot of folks was 2024 was not supposed to be as good as 2023. And the question is, will the pain trade in 2025 be that investors actually believe that things are so good that we're just going to continue onward? That's the irony here, is that I think there is a little bit of complacency out there. I think the tracks of your tears, Guy Adami, could be overindulgence into risk assets.
I like what you did there. I think the tracks of my tears for 2024 was not being nearly aggressive enough and waiting for the next shoe to drop, which never did. So my tears are the things that I missed in 24, and hopefully I'll figure out in 25. I've enjoyed this version of Tim's Vinyl Vault. Hopefully you have as well.
Tim's Vinyl Vault.
Always a great time and always relevant.
It is always relevant. And you know what else is relevant?
What?
Football.
Yeah,
This
it
is
is.
the time of year.
Are you kidding me? I mean, Christmas Day, Netflix is breaking out a football package. By the way, we thought they did well with Tyson Paul. I mean, you never know.
When we come back, we're going to build a perfect portfolio. We're also going to take a look at some perfect football teams that we're creating ourselves, so stick around.
Boom. Welcome back to Business Remix with Tim and Guy. Guy, we were just talking about how building a perfect portfolio, if you take it under the concept of, we'll call this the football edition
Yeah, sure.
of Build Your Own Portfolio. And again, it's a portfolio for 2025. Let's talk about the most important pieces of a football team. I guess it's not a stretch to say that the QB is the most important position.
I think that's right. Maybe the most important position in all of sport is the quarterback.
Wow.
So
Wow,
let's
you did
build.
that.
See what I did there?
Yeah.
So let's build a team with, let's call it a quarterback who throws the ball, a receiver who catches the ball.
Why are we acting like they don't do this anymore?
I'm kidding around.
Oh, okay.
A
Sorry.
running back who runs the ball.
Yeah.
And then we'll go to the other side of the field and we'll throw a defensive player. Take your pick. And then we can, people can sort of fill around the edge.
Let me ask you something, because as we get into this, it is prime time for football,
Sure.
right? The games really matter. We started to sort through the haves and the have-nots. Once again, New York football is have-not territory. Has the NFL oversaturated itself? There's a game almost every night.
Like what you did there.
I'm asking the question.
No, I know
Because
you're asking the
Monday Night
question.
Football, once a week, Howard Cosell, the Yellow Blazer, Dandy Don, it was exciting.
Throw Frank Gifford
Dun,
in the
dun,
booth.
dun,
Yeah,
dun.
100%.
All right.
So I'm a purist, as you know.
Of course you are.
If I had it my way, there'd be a 1 o'clock football
Sinatra.
game on Sunday,
Yep.
a 4 o'clock football game on Sunday, and there'd be Monday Night Football, and that would be it.
Yep.
Thursday night, Friday, no, it's not happening.
Yeah.
But listen, the world changes. You can't put that genie in the bottle. By the way, I Dream of Jeannie with Barbara Eden was
It's funny because you
unbelievable.
said Genie in a Bottle. I thought you were going with Aguilera. Christina.
Who was
But,
born, by the way, happy birthday, Christina
Oh,
Aguilera, born
good for you.
December 18th in the 1980s, I believe, but I
all right.
digress.
Okay. All right.
So, yes, I do think it's a bit oversaturated, but you know what? You're giving the people what they want. They want to see football as often as. You know why they want to see it,
Why?
Tim? Because they want to make wagers on it. That's it for a different show. But let's talk about building your perfect football team. You're a student of history. Who's your quarterback?
Well, and again, we're talking about the game today. I think
Sure.
you were saying they throw the ball, but the reality is that the prototypical NFL quarterback today can run the football as well. And there's an argument that some of these guys that have been drafted, like AR-15, Anthony
you.
Richardson. I don't think he had much of a gun in the AR-15, except for the fact that he was the number 2 overall pick last year and hadn't done anything in the Gators. By the way, go Gators. I married into the SEC, so it's kind of nice to go from a Georgetown football team that you played on, by the way.
Yes, I
No
did.
disrespect.
Well, you are
but
disrespecting me.
the Scarsdale Raiders probably could have beat the Georgetown Hoyas. That was my high school football team. Anyway, Patrick Mahomes. He's the number 1 quarterback because he can throw and pass and he can lead. I mean, he is a walking audible. That guy does whatever he wants on the field, and he moves in slow motion, yet he's running past you at full speed. He's tough. He's liked by his teammates.
Mm-hmm.
He's a leader. He's totally dedicated to his craft, and he's a winner.
I like what you did. You gave me a Patrick Mahomes. I understand that. Hard to argue.
Oh, come on.
But I'm going to go back in time a little
Also,
bit.
the lineage. His father pitched for the New York Mets.
Yes, he did.
All right, well,
not a great pitcher
that
for the
makes
Mets.
him a winner, doesn't it?
Well,
Oh, I'm sorry. So if the Mets had polluted the gene pool, would he be doing what he's doing? Anyway.
excellent point by
Thank
you.
you.
I'm going to go back a little ways. I'm
right.
going to take you back to the 1980s
Okay.
when we were in high school.
Yeah.
There was a guy that played at the University of Pittsburgh by the name of Dan Marino.
Sure.
Should have been the number 1 pick in the draft.
That's a great 30 for 30, ESPN.
But he had some issues around the draft, and he dropped. Dan Marino, in his time, was way ahead of the league. You put Dan Marino's in today's NFL, and he is lighting things up. So if I'm building a team, I'm doing it with Western Pennsylvania's Dan Marino.
It's interesting because, again, Marino was a guy, he had a very quick release. And I don't think people loved his throwing motion. But, again, he had attributes that people in the scouting combine, again, for folks listening and streaming right now, I'm doing the air quotes. We like to do that here. Yeah, so let's talk about the running back position, because what's fascinating, and we're going to talk about the stock market and the evolution of certain sectors and what have become hot sectors and what have become really long-term investments. The running back as an investment in the NFL, if you were a major buyer of the running back 10 years ago, you've lost a lot of money.
100%.
That is not a position teams are going to the bank on.
There was a time, though, when the running back was the premier position.
It was the glamour position.
So if I'm building my team, which I am, I'm going to go back in time again. I'm going to go back again to the 1980s, and I'm going to give you a Walter Payton, who was so far ahead of the game. You can't go wrong if you put Walter Payton on that team. Now, I'll say this. Gale Sayers I had running around in my head, but I'll take the Walter Payton over the Gale Sayers.
By the way, Business Remix 2025, by the way, it's going to be a big year for us. We're going to do the greatest sports movies of all time, and Brian's song, I mean, you know, the Gale Sayers, you know, Brian Piccolo relationship, that I'm tearing up just thinking about that. But anyway, I'm with you on Walter Payton, who, by the way, also has kind of a tragic story for such a great man and a man so well respected by his peers, in addition to his city and his country. Love sweetness. That was the heyday of the running back, because if you think back, I can almost tell you in like the late 70s into the mid 80s, every team had a flagship running back. You had a Tony Dorsett, you had a Lydell Mitchell on the Colts, you had a Lawrence McCutcheon on the Rams.
Your favorite running, there you go.
Chuck Foreman, number 44 on the Vikings. Everybody had one. You had to have a running back. Terry Metcalf on the Cardinals. I mean, it was the golden era for running backs. It's not today. It's more of a utility position in some ways. There's a couple that stand above. Unfortunately, the Giants let one get to Philly for you know.
You know, the Jets had a John Riggins back in the day. People forget that John Riggins started his career with the Jets. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball before we build our stock portfolio. If I'm building a defense, it begins and ends with one person, the greatest defensive player in the history of the NFL. Say what you want about off the field, on the field, never anybody like him. Lawrence Taylor.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about the off the field because we're talking about on the field. So forget all the off the field. The reality is he changed the position. He changed how the game was played. He changed how, frankly, suddenly you've now got cornerbacks and D-backs that are playing like linebackers, that are trying to play like LT. So I'm with you. And it's hard for me to do a whole lot better. I mean, I would just add what those Giants Super Bowl teams did to the linebacker core, and they had complementary pieces back there. Harry Carson, you know, Gary Reasons, and then of course Carl Banks, who does great work, by the way, in the media. Carl Banks calls it as he sees it, and I love that in the media, in the sports media.
Carl Banks should be in the Hall of Fame. All right, so let's build a stock portfolio. We ended with defense. Let's start with defense for you. What's defensive in 2025?
Yeah, I think you want to find a company that maybe also hasn't run for the roses, so to speak, but you want to find a company that I actually think is reasonably well positioned. And again, I would go into the money center banks and I would find J.P. Morgan. I know it's had a pretty good sized move, but I would make an argument that in a world where we think banks are pretty well positioned for the next 12 months based upon deregulation, steeper yield curve, I like J.P. Morgan. How about you?
I'm going to throw a Merck at you. I think Merck is defensive. It's had a rough end of 2024, but I think it's going to have a resurgence in 2025. I do think healthcare is defensive, so my first defensive pick would be Merck.
Yeah,
let's get a little offensive, though.
Yeah, let's get offensive. I think it's time to actually take a little swing on some beaten-up consumer discretionary names that I think actually could do okay. I'm talking about like a Diageo, world-class spirits operator, has been beaten up on this whole weakness out of China, the aspirational purchase of high-end whiskey is something that actually has suffered in the last year. This is this is the premier spirits brand at a time when I think there's some cyclicality that will support it. Valuation very interesting. Not a household name, but I'm playing defense while I'm also taking a sip off a fine single malt.
You're playing a little offense there. I'll play a little offense, and I'm going to do it in the form of something you're not going to see coming. Can I do that to you?
You're going to do it.
Williams-Sonoma.
Interesting.
Think about what they've done. They had a tremendous quarter at the end of this 2024. I think that's a stock that people are not giving enough attention to. It's offensive because people are buying full scale, full retail. They're buying their crock pots. They're buying their what?
Dutch ovens. Yeah,
Yes,
they're
they
Dutch
are.
ovens, by
and
the way.
they're doing it in a major way. So I'm going to give you a little Williams-Sonoma.
I like that. So we still have to kind of finish this off with a quarterback because I think again, as the scouting combine will do, people are going to have different names on the board, and I'm not sure everybody had these names. I think when you get back to the quarterback, it's relatively straightforward who's there. And to me, past performance isn't future performance, but it's Meta. Again, it's Facebook, it's Meta, whatever you want to call them. They are one of the few companies that really has actually gone to the bank on AI. They're a company whose valuation, even after a tremendous run, is very defendable. But there's leadership there. Again, they're leading in the areas of where technology and growth and the consumer are. They're not just a media company. They are a tech company. What are you doing?
Well, I'm going to give you Google, and you talk about the new era of football. Well, YouTube is the new era of watching things, and Google's all about that. And if you think about what's happening there, Google sets themselves apart. Their moat is still deep. Their moat is still wide.
Yep.
I want Google to be my quarterback.
Well, you know what else, Guy Adami? This is a new era of kind of business news and how it's delivered and spooned out. So we're going to say goodbye on Business Remix with Tim and Guy, but it's a new era.
See you later.
Turn out the light.
Okay, see,
it's
now
a decent Jim Morrison.
We've lost a number of our
It's a decent Jim
viewers.
Morrison.